a disruption. Portions of our town are disrupted continually. Progress, new highways, new building developments, new housing, maybe a new railroad spur, all because there are more people. But it changes the way our communities are. And sometimes, just sometimes, we lose sight of what was before. Now today we're at a reburial ceremony here in the town of Uxbridge, in the village of Ironstone, which has changed dramatically over time. What happened is a highway came through here, and they found a pauper's field, the almshouse pauper's fields of Uxbridge, which actually functioned from 1831 to 1872. And in that time, many people were buried here. And history came through and changed all that. There was a highway. They took the graves, and now, in a very dignified ceremony, they're putting them back. And this happens throughout our country. Old places get lost. Technology and progress changes the way they are. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at progress, but we're going to look at those places that time's kind of passed by, and we don't recognize them anymore. Hidden villages and hidden history. So join me, Chuck Arning, ranger of the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor, as we take a look at those pieces of our history that are hidden from view, and we hope to discover them. As you can see, a good deal of progress has been made in the restoration of this old cemetery here at Almshouse Road in the Ironstone section of Uxbridge, Massachusetts. But why was it disrupted in the first place? Good question. But if you look over my shoulder, I think the answer is pretty evident. A 4-lane highway came roaring through here and changed the landscape drastically. Even the village of Ironstone, too. Almost to the point where the village is no longer recognizable as a village. And yet the village dates back to 1734, when Benjamin Taft built a forge and a dam along the brook that now bears its name, Forge Brook. And this area had strong ties to the entrepreneurs of the Blackstone Valley. John Slater in Slatersville, Welcome and Darius Farnham, who began their manufacturing pursuits here before they went to Blackstone. Now here you have this interesting little village that's had its identity cut off by a highway, an all too common phenomenon. Well, let's catch up with community planner Nancy Britton with the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor and find out how it all happened. Now, Nancy, Ironstone itself is what we'd call a pre-industrial village.
That's
Can
right.
you give us a good definition of what that is?
Yeah, most of the pre-industrial villages were located on the upland part of the valley, and they were centered around agricultural communities. And they often had a little stream like the Forge Brook over here that was part of the center of activity, and there were grist mills and other kinds of mills on a much smaller scale that pertained to the farming activity here. And they often had just a little crossroads. It was a fairly simple form of a settlement pattern. And there were little community icons, not unlike the school here, or a meeting house and things like that. So it was a fairly simple layout of a community. This was an important village, although it doesn't have that same prominence today. But this was an important little village. It was one of the earliest, maybe the earliest in Uxbridge, and it was a crossroads for agriculture. And there was actually a little railroad that came through here, and a depot that was located not far from where we stand.
So it had all the attributes of a thriving little community.
That's right.
And yet today, it's really hard to find, isn't it?
It is. It's been cut off from the rest of the community for all practical purposes. And I think if we go back to the Industrial Revolution, there was a tremendous amount of development and activity and change going on, but it was really all centered along the river, along the Blackstone River, and the main tributaries of the Blackstone. And so there were different changes that started to take place here, and especially when major transportation systems began to be overlaid on this landscape on the upland part of the valley, you really had a significant impact on little places like Ironstone. So in this case, the highway came and really cut it right off from the community. And so what's visible is just this little bit of a center here. And there are other little clues in the landscape that people can discover too, that tell a little bit about what was here before. But it's really physically cut off from the fray and activity of the community and where it's growing today.
Now, one of the things that we want to focus on is how do you reclaim your history once it's been kind of broken off from everything else? We have highways all around us. If you didn't know this was here, you'd never stumble upon it, even in your wildest dreams,
That's
because
right.
it's so disconnected
That's right.
from the town of Uxbridge.
That's not an easy question to answer. Every community may have a different take on how they want to identify their special place that's hidden nonetheless, but they want to identify that. But one way is to try to highlight those features that you might have to uncover or unsleuth, that you might have to find, and to highlight those by having signs that say this is a special place or this is an important village. Another way might be to circulate a newsletter, a community newsletter, talking about the history and the special places and what remnants can still be found today.
Now, Nancy, one other aspect of preserving your hidden history is for the local citizens to get involved.
That's
and
right.
here in Ironstone, they've really been very successful, haven't they?
Right. Well, you can see that they've restored the schoolhouse, and they've done a wonderful job, and even inside it really resembles the one-room schoolhouse that it used to be. They have ideas for putting exhibits in the inside, and they've already been holding events here as a way of introducing the larger Uxbridge community into this special place and what Ironstone was all about.
Transportation systems seem to be the biggest culprit in the cutting off of and dislocating portions of our communities. Those Native American trails and farmers' horse cart paths just don't seem to cut it anymore when it comes to transporting large amounts of raw materials, finished goods, and in today's case, people. And yet, some villages have managed to maintain their sense of character. They've managed to survive in spite of all this dislocation, if you know where to look for them. So let's catch up with Ranger Jack Whitaker and our Blackstone moment to learn a little bit about the village of Arnold Mills and its efforts to preserve its history and its specialness of place.
This is Jack Whitaker, Ranger with the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor, and welcome to Arnold Mills. And actually, it's one of those hidden villages that was hidden so well it wasn't even in Rhode Island when it was settled. Where we're standing at this moment was Massachusetts, the Mass Bay Colony. Back in the 17th century, this was called the Attleboro Gore, and it was a slice that didn't become part of Rhode Island until the 1740s. To our right front over here, there's a patch of woods where iron was forged. They had a blast furnace and a forge in there back in the early 18th century. That was one of the reasons that development of industry began here in the rural farming community of Arnold Mills. Arnold Mills was not one of those farming communities that switched over to industrialization and became a center for factories. It was a community that used the Industrial Revolution, but used it and remained a farming community. On the west side of Abbott Run was the site of a sawmill, and on the east side, a grist mill. The sawmill about 1734, the grist mill 10 years later. The mills operating there used a mill run that later would power the Metcalf mill, which was a combination blacksmith shop, textile mill, and carriage repair shop. To my rear, there's an open field that used to be the carriage repository, and it was a used car lot really for carriages sold in the area. This area also produced a lot of wood, and we have stories of farmers here hauling their wood all the way to Boston and Providence for firewood. There's a story of a young man who took a load of firewood into Boston, and on the way back during a blizzard across Roxbury Neck out of Boston, he and his team froze to death before they could get back to their home here in Arnold Mills. The sawmill is gone, the grist mill is gone, and the combination blacksmith shop, textile mill, and carriage repository is gone. But a highway divided what was left of Arnold Mills in half when Nate Whipple Highway was constructed through the area. To the south, you have a small section of the village where the Grange is located, where the Friends Meeting House going back to 1810 is located, where the community building and library are, and then this little street, Sneech Pond Road, which was the main street of Arnold Mills to 200 years of history. But Arnold Mills is still a vibrant, active little community. They have a parade here every year on the 4th of July that draws people from all over northern Rhode Island and parts of Massachusetts. A walking tour has been developed and printed by the Park Service through the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor, and people can self-guide themselves through the village here, and it gives you all the information about the houses and the people who lived in them. It does not include that section of the village on the south side, but it's well worth a trip over there to see the one-room schoolhouse and the old Grange and the old Friends Meeting House. This is a spot that is rich in history. It never developed into a big city or a mill town, but it did reflect that combination of agrarian development and industrial strength that would be part of this area, the Blackstone Valley, throughout history. This is Jack Whitaker, National Park Service Ranger, wishing you happy hikes through the valley, and come down here to Arnold Mills and enjoy a bit of Rhode Island history.
The scene behind me could have come out of the 1800s, when this area was very much a rural agrarian community. A lot has changed in the village of Ironstone since those days, and we're here to tell its story, because the community will not let us forget its history and its heritage of this unique region. Using two very different approaches and two very different community organizations, a lot of hard work, energy, and creative thought has gone into preserving and protecting the unique character of the Ironstone village. Now, how does that happen? Well, to find out, we're going to touch base with both groups. Our first stop, however, is with the South Uxbridge Community Organization. Gentlemen, what got you involved with the history in protecting your area?
Well, I think what started way back in the last of the 40s when they closed the one-room schoolhouse, which we have our clubhouse in. They decided that rather than have it torn down or turned into a home or something like all the rest of the one-room schoolhouses in the area, they decided to make it into a club, and the people wanted to take and keep the area as it was as much as they could. And it also helps each other, you know, they're always listening to each other's problems, and they could get together and solve them, and also they could get together and have a lot of fun at the same time. And this is one way of knowing what goes on in the community. Good gossip goes a long way. Every time it gets a chance where new blood comes along, it seems to get a spirit, and this is the time that new blood has come along. There's a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas. I mean, the square dances and whist parties were the main attraction of the place for entertainment. And now we had a barbecue this summer, a chicken barbecue, which was something that was unheard of in our group. And then we had Conrad Schultz come along and dream up the idea of a Halloween hayride, and it was something that just clicked automatically. Everybody at first was hesitant. They didn't want to go change right away, but I mean, the way he took the bull by the horns, it just worked remarkable, and everybody just went along. The volunteer effort, everybody just couldn't seem to do enough.
My connection with it originally came when I was invited to join the organization a couple of years ago. The organization's charter is both a social and political organization. And so, as Danny mentioned earlier, it goes through different phases of interest, either socially or politically. One of my concerns as a resident of South Uxbridge and a nearby neighbor to the Ironstone village, where the schoolhouse is and the association quarters are, have been some of the concerns with certain types of development that have occurred in the area. There have been attempts to put a variety of types of heavy and or polluting industry in this area. As you know, the roadway has changed considerably in this area over the last 15 years or so, with the 146 structure in particular. We wanted to do something that helped to preserve the area from the various assaults that were occurring to it. So it seemed natural to join the organization and to become active in it. A number of political issues that have caused, I think, a lot of citizens to become reactivated in this organization. And one of those is, I think the biggest physical impact, however, that has occurred has been the impact of Route 146, as it's really separated the Ironstone village area, which was the original settlement in Uxbridge, what was then a part of Mendon, before it even was Uxbridge, that is now isolated from its farmlands by 146. The area is ringed by industry, which is encroaching on it every day, and I think largely it was that stimulated so many people, so many people's interest in, particularly in the Ironstone village area.
And so the South Uxbridge Community Association is really a throwback to those days where you can rely on your friends in a rural agrarian economy back then. But today, and when you got new people moving to town, you've still managed to resurrect that concept where you know you have friends you can go to, you know there's the people who think like you do who you can go to and talk out problems and help solve some of the dynamics that are always pressing on open space here.
Oh, that's true. There is always an encroachment. I mean, the open space is going to be less and less as years go by. We are quite happy the Blackstone Valley Heritage Council there is doing their job, because it will save an awful lot along the river, because all that land they'd just build right close to it as far as the law would allow.
Well, I think we'd like to see kind of a more cohesive approach to what we're doing, I guess I'd say. And by that I mean not having to defend so much against each new assault to the community, but rather being more proactive, to use kind of an 80s or 90s term, in both protecting the community now in ways that the entire town, not just the South Uxbridge residents, can appreciate and understand. It's really important on the one hand to have the support of the local residents. On the other hand, you need to build a larger sort of support base and citizenry than that to have the kind of impact that you need to. So I think we want to be seen, and I think we're already taking those positive steps, to be a more proactive, positive organization, as opposed to being perceived as a sort of defending your turf organization.
I would like to see them keep as much property, open space property, as possible. I think that people will realize this, or have realized it now, because there are so many programs by different states to encourage people to keep their land instead of sell it to developers. I would like to retain this the way it is for this area, and it'll just be like a Central Park.
Isn't that true?
Yeah, I mean, all around us, you got Slatersville in Smithfield, you got Burrillville, the rest of Burrillville over here in the back of us, and Uxbridge on the other side, and of course they're all constantly building houses all the time. And I mean, all along Quaker Highway is a business zone, and it will be business, and I'd just like to keep this intact as much as I can, and so people, they will have to have some place to enjoy.
I think that's great, because if you drive along here in these old country farm roads and these beautiful stone walls and see all the wildlife, we came by a flock of wild turkeys, you get a sense of what Dan and Conrad are working hard to achieve. Well, listen, gentlemen, thank you very much. Now, our next stop is we're going to the public library, because there's more to learn here about how to preserve and protect your village. Now, you took advantage of an opportunity here that most people wouldn't even see as an opportunity. The Department of Transportation came by here to do a highway, and they came across this burial ground. How did you come up with the idea that this was something really significant for the town of Uxbridge and should be followed through on?
But I think the credit for what occurred here really goes to local citizens and also to the Nipmuc Indians, who became aware during just before phase 3 of the dualization project to widen 146 came to fruition. The representatives, the citizens and the Native Americans were there to meet with the local and state representatives to say, you know, hey, this is here, we think it's significant, and you know, we need to take a look at it and to do something about it. And so Mass Historical decided, yes, these are significant sites, they should be studied. And it was their recommendation then that when they would be disinterred, that the remains would go to Boston University, and Boston University would do a complete analysis and study of the remains. So that way, then we would learn something from this, you know, and get back a part of our history that we may have lost. And so that's what set us on the track. Another thing was that there was an agreement that if the remains were disinterred, to allow the road to continue, that the state and the federal monies would pay to reinter them at a new location. And so that's how the project was shaped from the very beginning 10 years ago.
It has been very well received in this library. When I sat down with Shelley and with Nancy Seasholes, who was in on the project, and we discussed the exhibit, this is what I had hoped for. I had hoped people would come in, would stop, would look at it, and would make comment about it, and that's exactly what's happened. We've had people who are regular library users who come in and look again. I mean, this is not something that they see once and that they're done looking at. But we've also had people coming from other areas who come specifically to look at this fine work, and clearly a tremendous amount of effort and a tremendous amount of care has been put into this exhibit. And the library couldn't be a better place for it, and we're very pleased to be at least the opening location for this exhibit, which I'm sure we'll find other places to go as well. I think that it puts people in touch with the history of the community in a way that they hadn't. This is very personal, when they can look in the display case and see coffin nails and view plates, and look at the stone itself. It really makes it very real. And the interest, of course, has been not just among adults, but among children as well, and parents explaining to children, and children viewing this exhibit. It really has been an excellent thing for this library, and I'm very pleased to have hosted it.
I think something else that happened in this project that turned out to be a plus was that we learned so much more about our community and about our people and about our heritage that came through the historical research that was involved in this project. But if we have to step back and ask us what have we learned about communities and historical preservation, I think what is very real is that as communities, we need to take charge of our own historic resources. We can't wait for others to stumble upon them or just take it for granted they're going to be there always. And in this instance, what's happened is that when there are state, federal projects, and even local projects that come into being, usually there's a process by which they go to local historical societies and say, you know, is there anything of historical significance in the area? Or certainly in state and federal projects, they go to Mass Historical Commission during the planning phase and ask those questions for documentation or information about what might be historically impacted. And if they don't have anything on file,
and they aren't aware of it, through Massachusetts Historical Commission or through your local commission, then that information can't be used in the very early stages to make some thoughtful decisions on how we can, move forward and make changes in areas, but without impacting our historical resources. So it's very important and very valuable to have that information in the early planning stages. Mass Historical Commission has a historic properties survey information that can be given to communities where we can do our own documentation of historic sites, just where they're located, what kind of resources are there, whether they can be historic homes, they can be historic cemeteries, they can be even archaeological sites where maybe a number of arrowheads or shards of pottery are found, whatever they are, anything of historical significance to the town. Those can be reported and at least documented to their location, and then be filed with Mass Historical Commission and through your local historical commission. So then when projects come before either one of these bodies, then they can be made aware of it, and we can work together to make some thoughtful decisions about how we can move forward with the project, but that we won't, damage or alter our historic resources. I think we need to do more of that.
The Blackstone Valley is filled with villages that have a very interesting past, but today you'd have a difficult time trying to find them, but they're there. Now we're here in the village of Primrose in North Smithfield, Rhode Island. We're just off the Greenville Road, also known as Route 104, and behind us is Primrose Pond. You can see the old colonial dam and a power trench in the foundations for an all-sawmill that goes back to 1750. Now this area was a bustling community back in the 1750s, 1780s. And behind us, also in Primrose Pond, was ice harvesting, was a very important enterprise. It used to be known as Crystal Lake at that time as well. This area was named Primrose back in 1873 when the Providence and Springfield Railroad came through here. They built a railroad depot nearby, and while constructing it, they cut down a lot of wild English primrose. And they thought Primrose was a pretty good name for that depot. It's always fascinating to me to see how places get their names. Now this pond is also the headwaters of the Woonasquatucket River, which flows into Providence and was used as a portion of the Blackstone Canal. This area has always been a rural farming district and still has that farming quality to the landscape, although a lot has changed. Traffic patterns take you away from the scenic drives along the Grange Road, where the 1887 Grange Hall is still serving the local community. There are a wide variety of homes here that date back to the early 1700s, such as Malavey Home, and several taverns that go back to the 1810. The families who farm this area are still here, the Malorys, the Goodwins, and some offshoots of the Slaters from Slatersville. The land has been kept in the family, which is one reason why large developments aren't found here. But once refrigeration was affordable, there was no need for ice harvesting. And farming in New England has always been a hardscrabble existence. On top of that, this area didn't have the water power that you'll find just north of here along the Branch River, and therefore you won't find mills in this particular area. And so over time, this pretty little area was passed over. Matter of fact, the last major change to this area happened in 1966 when they built a new high school. But if you enjoy getting off the beaten path, there are a lot of very lovely, scenic, and narrow farm roads that can give you a feel of what it was like to be in a farming community back in the 1700s. One of the many aspects of being a park ranger that's the most fun is that I'm constantly learning from the people in the communities I work in. It's one of the great aspects about my particular job. Since I'm in the business of preserving and protecting our history, in this complex world that we live in, no one has all the answers. Learning is an ongoing process. In the Park Service, we use many approaches to protect our history, our natural resources, and the many cultures that make up this great country. In the early days of our country, we relied on our neighbors. By developing a sense of community, it was our key to survival. That concept is being reinvented here in the village of Ironstone in Uxbridge, Massachusetts. And by listening to Dan Richardson, it becomes quite apparent that by developing that sense of community right here, through residents, some of the families go back centuries and some are brand new to the area, they're really preserving and protecting their history. Building a sense of community and protecting your history. Now that's one heck of an idea. Now this has been Chuck Arning, ranger of the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. By developing a sense of community, building on your past, you're protecting it at the same time. Now that's something you might take home to your communities. Well, I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time.